Good afternoon and welcome to the Federal Executive Forum celebrating 19 years of profiling excellence in government IT mission programs. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out zero trust strategies and technologies. With me on today's show are Brandy Sanchez, Zero Trust Initiative Lead at CISA, Randy Resnick, Director, Zero Trust Portfolio Office at DoD, Dr. Mark Stanley, Enterprise Cybersecurity Architect and Zero Trust Lead at NASA, Amir Dastori, Chief Information Security Officer, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, aka FERC, Chris Roberts, Director of Federal Engineering, Quest Software Public Sector, and Gary Bartlett, Public Sector CTO at Illumio. Well, we had the executive order for Zero Trust Initiative that came out, or Zero Trust Architecture that came out, I think it was back in 2022. We had a little bit more guidance that came out recently over the summer about getting your plans together and making sure that we had a good 2026 submission. Brandy, we're going to start with you. Give us a top line of the state of the state on the Zero Trust Initiative across the federal service.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me here. So some examples of where we've been making progress with Zero Trust initiatives. Over the past 6 months, CISA formalized our Zero Trust initiative, which I'm the lead of. It's a matrix effort of SMEs across CISA to advance the adoption of Zero Trust principles and a place to kind of centralize our Zero Trust efforts and messaging both internally and for our external partners. And while our efforts are mainly focused on the federal civilian executive branch agencies, a lot of our current initiatives are focused on providing valuable guidance to help organizations of all kinds navigate the complexity of zero trust adoption and cultivating a strong zero trust community to support and amplify that progress and best practices with each other. Our Zero Trust community efforts are, a key area of focus for our team and built on a foundation of direct feedback and interaction with Zero Trust SMEs across the federal government. Mark Stanley's part of that group, and I know Randy. We've had several conversations with you and your team on the efforts that you guys are doing as well. And our Zero Trust community has kind of grown from a small, tight-knit group of around about 80 practitioners in January 2023 to over 500 members today. So quite a bit of growth there. And this community has been a huge driver of change across the federal enterprise, effectively communicating, collaborating, and strategically identifying ways to upskill our federal workforce and build a community centered on zero trust principles and best practices. So my team captures those insights, those needs and challenges to see where CISA can help play a role in agencies' zero trust journeys. And we've realized that we are stronger together as a federal enterprise. So the community effort is a huge part of that mission and the progress that we've made over the past 2 years.
Really appreciate the leadership across CISA pulling this monumental task together. Speaking of monumental task, Randy, I can't imagine the daunting responsibility that you have to pull all these moving parts together, get everyone moving in the same direction regarding the rollout of Zero Trust. Give us a state of the state.
So in DoD, we're now approaching almost 3 years working the problem officially from the DoD CIO's point of view. But there was early work on Zero Trust between NSA, DISA, and Cyber Command just prior to that of about a year and a half or 2 years. So it kind of started as an idea and a thought and hands-on about 5 years ago. But it really turbocharged when the Zero Trust Portfolio Office was established. So the state of the state is really impressively positive. We have been able to move millions of thought leaders in the DoD, endpoints, military services, the components, towards zero trust. The most important thing is not necessarily resources, it's leadership commitment and the continuous leadership commitment from the top down to send the signal that zero trust is absolutely critical if we're to maintain our mission going forward, given the tactics, techniques, and procedures of our adversaries. So we have been very successful in defining what zero trust is, how to implement zero trust. We have beefed up our ability to do purple teaming, which is red and blue, attacks and defend on systems to prove that these systems work. We have talked to our allies and exchanged our documentation so they could level up very quickly. And as Brandy mentioned, we have done a tremendous amount of outreach to share our knowledge, share our strategies and implementation plans so that others can literally save 4 years, comparatively speaking, 3 years, whatever it might be, just to give them an idea of what we're doing so that they can iterate on that if they choose. Most folks have recently probably read about Navy's flank speed hitting advanced level zero trust, quite frankly, 3 years ahead of schedule. That is a monumental achievement. It shows to the detractors that zero trust is achievable with non-GFE technology. This was all industry developed on top of industry hardware and software. So this shows that it could be done. And we have many, many success stories in the future that are going to be coming. I'll just close it by saying in the next 12 months, we're going to probably be doing 18 more pilots. And we have some in the pipeline right now. So out of the 18 or 22 total we have going on in the next 12 months, we're going to get a large fraction of that, at least 25% if you're a pessimist. That's going to likely hit target level zero trust. So there's going to be a compilation of success stories here that at the DoD level of target level will be identified. And the positive thing is that the DoD will be able to hopefully meet their mandate of the end of 27. But the other positive thing is that these solutions are not only developed for the DoD, they would be available to Brandy and CISA and the FedCIF community. They would be available to our allies. They would be available to the Intel community, the DIB. So you could see that as DoD plows that new road, for zero trust successes, it actually seeds successes all throughout, what we care about in terms of lifting all boats. And that's
we
the true
certainly,
success so far of the
yeah,
portfolio office.
really do appreciate the leadership and the offering of DoD to sort of plow that path that you described, as to go on that journey and then make that available for reuse to the rest of the community. That's
Exactly.
awesome. Hats off to the Navy for that
Yeah.
remarkable achievement as well. Mark, how about over at NASA? I would imagine that you all have a very unique environment there with all these sophisticated capabilities that you have out there, that whole commercial program now, a complex environment that you have to secure. Give us a top line.
Well, you really put your finger on it from a complexity perspective at NASA. When the command came down to move to zero trust, we had to take a look at our whole enterprise and determine where we could best, apply resources. And what we figured was that our mission side, it's extremely important that we understand risk before we move forward with any kind of a capability change. So we began our journey on our corporate network. And from the corporate side, we stood up our cybersecurity improvement portfolio so that we can make sure that projects and initiatives that were associated with getting us to the technological parts of zero trust were well managed. And so from that perspective, we were able to break out the executive order, all of the OMB memoranda, the SolarWinds pass-back engagement. We came up with 111 requirements. From those, we went to 9 programs with a total of 85 programs. And we baselined that back in April of 2023. We then went through a process where we went to a gap analysis and a roadmap development effort that yielded another 111 requirements. And so from there, we were actually able to shape our portfolio to 8 programs. So we reduced it by 1, but we came up to 90 projects and initiatives. And from that, we've actually been very successful. Since the start of the portfolio, we've been able to address 27 of those projects and initiatives and have completed them, which is, basically allowed us to add maturity to Zero Trust across all of our pillars. And we're looking forward to the upcoming year where we see more opportunities to continue to mature.
And we really do appreciate the top line outline there, and certainly a very complex environment that we appreciate you keeping that secure. Amir, how about at FERC? Tell us, give us 30 seconds on what FERC does, and then how you're making sure that through Zero Trust you're securing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the Zero Trust effort, the memorandum from CISA, I thought it was outstanding and provided exactly kind of the steps and actions needed. So we took that to heart and took all the pillars, the tasks, the actions, and formulated our plan directly based off of those. So we run an agile shop and kind of the typical structure. We turned all those tasks and actions into epics, and then we gathered a portfolio of all the people involved, or the teams involved across the organization, and mapped them all there. So we now had a portfolio of what do we exactly need to achieve for the tasks and actions in the Zero Trust mandate, and who needs to participate with them. And that way the work and the projects trickle down to each of the teams, all centrally matched up to kind of the epic portfolio that we had. Some of the big successes there that we've had across the past couple years, I'll say one of them is in the data pillar. We have a complete controlled and classified information program where we've worked with all of our program offices as well as with NARA to finalize all of our labels, and it's mandatory labeling across our entire environment. And our data governance team has also taken that and started labeling the same CUI labels on the data assets. So that enables us to now move forward with our existing data loss prevention program and more fine tune it to some of these CUI labels and to the specific data. So where's the risk, where's the sensitive data? Additionally, another big thing that we have increased our Zero Trust capabilities on the past couple of years has been on encryption. And I know the Zero Trust mandate talked about web encryption and all web layer traffic being encrypted. So we took that and we also kind of expanded to things like application to database traffic, any kind of directory traffic. We sniffed out and identified any of that which was not encrypted internally. Obviously, externally it was all encrypted, and internally we've now all moved that to encrypted as well. That was a really, really great collaboration with our application team, figuring out kind of timing, spacing, and they've been fantastic at getting that done.
Sounds like you all have made tremendous progress, and we really do appreciate you keeping that environment secure. Chris, how about over at Quest Software? You are in a unique position there where you can stripe across all these agencies along with the private sector and really get a catbird seat of what's going on across the community. Give us a top line as to what you're observing.
Sure, for as my perch here in the catbird seat, you just give me flashbacks of Tweety Bird. But from a historical standpoint, Zero Trust is not a new concept. I mean, we've had it in other environments and operating systems, least privilege in the Unix platform, but even go further back. Think of DoD.
Yeah.
You just couldn't walk in and just walk into a missile silo, for instance. So we've had examples of Zero Trust in the past. I think the challenge has been moving those strategies and processes over to a broad end user community. So millions of users across the federal government. And what we found is the challenge of Zero Trust hasn't been really the technology. So we have great technology and we've excelled at that with our customers and clients. It's really the political side of getting those who are special or have been special for many years to say, you know what, you no longer have that kind of access to the systems. And I've seen that fight play out in admin teams, in NOCs, between the Windows people, the Linux people, the application folk and the database folk. And that's the part of Zero Trust that's difficult. So what we've seen progress on is the acceptance of what your role and your role-based access profile really should be, and then accepting the tools that are going to give you the ability to govern those platforms and those tier zero objects. So how do you know which admin is doing what, where, and when? And then also every end user, how do you understand exactly what data points or data access points that they're using, what devices are they using, and even for the developers, what APIs are they using and what security is around those APIs? I think that's one of the gaps sometimes in our zero trust architectures. We think so much of the access portion, that is, well, who are we going to grant access to? But once you grant access to, what about the other biological people that use the platform? So think of an application, that API, what is it calling? Think of all the mobile devices we have, all the applications that are downloaded to those devices, some public, some private, and what are those applications actually doing out there in the ether space, so to speak. So we've seen an embracing now of how do you govern that? How do you protect those tier zero assets? And how do you not get in the way of productivity? And I think that's another challenge we can probably have a whole show on, but just enveloping users with now the tools that make them not just secure, but also compliant with zero trust, so everyone can raise their hand and do really well on those scorecards for FITARA.
Sure. And, we've all been through the least privileged drill, and a difficult one for everyone to get used to and mindful of, but certainly very important. And you raise a very good point there about it's way bigger than just the least privileged drill. It's really what happens after that. Gary, how about at Illumio? You're in a unique situation there where, this zero trust architecture mandate gets out there. It's an absolute death march to the finish, so to speak. We all know it's a journey. Everyone's doing north and south, but what about east to west? Has the community embraced that? Have they figured it out?
Yeah. So have they figured it out? They're working on it. I kind of agree with Chris, right? One of the things that we have seen is no longer do I go in and meet with whether it's federal leaders or commercial leaders and have to start with explaining what zero trust is and why it's important, right? Now, when we're having conversations, it's more at the strategic level. They're having conversations about not what is it or should I do it, but how should I do it, right? And what makes sense to do. And even when you look at the realm that I live in specifically with that east-west micro segmentation piece, more and more agencies and across the DoD are really starting to realize the importance of, hey, it's not just about who gets into the network, but where they go inside the network and how wide open is your network and how can you really break down your enterprise into segments so that if something bad happens, which they all are starting to acknowledge, there's most likely something bad will happen. They really want to try to prevent a bad thing from happening, but they're really starting to wake up to the conversation of, okay, let's assume something bad's going to happen. How can we minimize the impact of that, right? How can we ensure that one little bad thing doesn't turn into a complete cyber disaster? So I've been really heartened by the fact that from the senior leadership levels on down, they're really starting to acknowledge and embrace all of these concepts and really putting the effort and the resources into making them a reality.
And that's great. Yeah, the fire fighting community taught us 40 years ago that, look, we need to put codes in place so that if one townhouse catches on fire, it's only that townhouse, it's not the entire row. So I'm pleased to see that everyone is embracing that concept that minimize the damage when the damage occurs. All right, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architectures, and we're going to get into specific examples that we'd like to highlight. Mark, we're going to start with you at NASA. You want to give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight that has been successful or not?
Well, interestingly enough, we touched on that a little bit earlier. The biggest or most striking accomplishment that from my perspective here at NASA has been the stand-up of our cybersecurity improvement portfolio. And the portfolio was stood up in August of 2022. Again, we broke out, all the various requirements and whatnot and established a set of programs and initiatives to help us get to zero trust. But that's not the only thing that we have going on in regards to that. We mentioned earlier that the way in which we are reducing risk is by focusing on our corporate network, which handles, that's the A-suite level communications, the payroll, the kinds of business functions for NASA. The reason being is there's a lot less risk there if we make a mistake. And certainly, when we get our lessons learned and we understand, precisely what we want to do, and we start working with our mission folks, we want to be able to give them good, solid advice on how to pursue zero trust. Now, one of the things I typically tell folks is that, we've got some missions today that may lend themselves well to zero trust. As we look at our Moon to Mars architecture, the more advanced kinds of technologies that are being developed, there's that opportunity to infuse zero trust. But when we look at what else is out there, it changes the calculus. So, for example, last year we had some challenges with one of our longest running missions, the Voyager 1. It failed to send back information to Earth, and the very, 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 very smart people at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the NASA engineers and scientists were able to figure out how to solve that problem so that spacecraft, which is in interstellar space, now think of that, this is beyond the solar system, this is out there, and it's still sending back science. And it's not just Voyager 1, it's also Voyager 2. But the Voyager 1 issue, they were able to solve it. We're now getting information from that spacecraft. Well, I don't want to be the guy that goes over and says, hey, you need to implement this piece of zero trust, and it stops sending back science forever, right? So we want to make sure that we understand the risks of what we're doing so that we don't break a mission. More importantly, we also want to make sure that we don't do something that might cause harm or potentially catastrophic outcomes for human spaceflight. So when we look at our mission side and we look at our federally funded research and development center, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, we want to make sure that we really understand what the risks are before we try and implement something. But in terms of something that's truly been a wonderful success story for us is kind of the synergy that's developed across our Office of our Chief Information Officer in terms of being able to deliver technical capabilities to the network. We're working off of a very balanced approach, trying to address all the pillars and cross-cutting capabilities somewhat simultaneously so that we don't have resources that may remain idle while we wait for others to catch up. We also have, looking at the human component or the person component, our digital transformation effort is looking at how we're improving communications across the NASA enterprise in terms of providing information on zero trust through our improved websites, training through our learning management system. We just finished a very successful cybersecurity campaign. It was our fall in love with cybersecurity, very, very heavily weighted on zero trust to get awareness across the entire NASA enterprise. And we also have our cybersecurity and privacy division. There's a team that is right now combing through all of the NASA policy instruments to make sure that we're promoting zero trust where we need to, and we're removing any kind of a speed bump where we have to. So from that perspective,
fantastic,
balanced approach. Thank you.
I love the idea. Fall in love with cybersecurity. Very well. And a nice little catch line there. Brandy, how about at CISA? Would you like to give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight there on this zero trust journey that you have everyone on?
Sure. So at CISA, we have a unique ability to convene across the federal enterprise. We recognize that every agency's zero trust journey is unique, but we're finding that many of the challenges are universal. Agencies are taking the right steps, but at this point, as Gary mentioned earlier, we're ready to move beyond the basics of zero trust and really dive into the more complex areas of how to best implement zero trust from a mission-focused and threat-informed viewpoint. One great example of this is that CISA recently published an article on USDA's FIDO implementation success story. And this really shows how they developed a technical solution that fit their unique environment and a unique use case to address phishing-resistant MFA requirements for their workforce. Implementing zero trust architecture at scale requires a a significant cultural shift within all levels. Randy mentioned that earlier, right? Coming from the top down, having that executive buy-in and really kind of just helping move those efforts along. It requires IT, security, engineers, budget, leadership, and users to understand the importance of zero trust and their direct role in making it successful. So the current threat environment requires bold changes to traditional security practices, and those agencies that leaned into this early on found great success and continue to adjust and to align to the ever-evolving cyber threat landscape and their unique mission outcomes.
Yeah, you cited USDA. It's a massive enterprise over there. People don't recognize how broad of a spectrum is, including internationally. So appreciate the call out to our good folks over there at USDA. Chris, how about at Quest Software? Would you like to highlight a program that you've been in the middle of helping one of these agencies implement?
Sure, and I'm going to stress the word middle of. So I think the last time I talked about the stress between different groups who are typical security administrators. We had one agency and several, not just agencies, but we've seen this across systems integrators and folk who have a mixed environment. So that is, we've had camps of people who have invested heavily in Windows-based technologies or Azure, and are heavily invested in directory services that are based on Microsoft technologies. And then you have folk that are heavily invested in more open source technologies that are Linux dependent and managed. And now you have to determine, well, who is the source of truth? Is it the Linux database guys and Linux guys, or is it the Windows folk? And it's a classic age-old battle, kind of like Sir Lancelot.
And the two shall never meet.
The two shall never meet. And you know what? In most cases now, we actually like them to meet. So we would typically tell a CISO, we'd like a person from the Linux team and the Windows team. And we sort of like pick these brand ambassadors, if you want to call them that. And we sit them down and says, like, hey, look, here are the way you approach security, how you approach permissions and compliance and audit, and here's how Windows does it. And we try to get them to see they're not that far apart. And then we show them how we can help them bridge those technologies. So when you have an object, whether it's a tier 0 object, an end user object, an application object, we can bridge that between the Linux, Unix world and the Windows world. And if you can do that, for instance, on premise to start, it makes that integration when you get to multi-cloud, whether it's, Entra ID or AWS, it makes the growth and scalability and security for those applications and services much more seamless. And first, it starts at home. If you can get these teams to collaborate on security in-house before they go broader, it makes life a lot easier for the agencies. And we've seen that start to take place. It's not easy. We're in the middle sometimes. It's not funny or comfortable, but we've seen it work when those teams get together and start to understand that zero trust is a cross-platform thing. It's not platform specific.
Amen to that, and we really do appreciate the example there, Randy. I'm thinking about all these different environments, embedded systems, etc. You want to give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight?
So you really you lined it up well for me. Let me talk about a process rather than a program. I mean, obviously, a program would be flank speed, which is the end result of the process I'm about to lay out at high level. When the portfolio office thought through, how are we going to have a sustained zero trust ecosystem? It begins from the concept of identifying, what do you want to build? What are you trying to solve? All the way to fielding and sustainment and, end of life. And so we came up with a process which actually changes a lot of things in DoD, which may very well affect the rest of the federal government. We're still testing it out. But we came up in the portfolio office, and we've transmitted this in conferences that we've described this, of our ZT assessment process that mostly begins with the developer. The developer is building something, but the question becomes, how do they know they hit target level ZT before the actual red or blue team? And so we came up with a tool, a Q&A assessment process that's repeatable, that can reliably inform the developers that they are likely going to be ready for a purple team. And so that's pretty invaluable, and it's automated. From there, we developed 10 ZT criteria, scenarios. You could think of them almost as TTPs of the adversary. Because what we want to do is, instead of using a red team just to get in and, plant the flag and say, I got in, we are flipping the coin completely on how we're using red teams. Instead, we're taking a DoD red team and we're using them to improve the product. So instead of getting a file or a folder like they used to have as the example of what they needed to do and show that they got in or show that they couldn't get in, of course they were always successful, we're having them go through those 10 ZT criteria as part of the assessment process. So we are on station for 2 or 3 weeks, and the red team and the blue team are launching scenarios of these 10 criteria. Why are we choosing this criteria? Because it's repeatable. Also, the 10 criteria were specifically developed to exercise pretty much all the activities up to advanced level ZT. So by outcomes rather than checklists, if the red team is stymied or blocked from a number of these ZT criteria, if not all of them, it indirectly but very strongly indicates that the activities were correctly implemented in the system. So we had to think about that. So, how do you red team a ZT configuration? Well, this is what I'm describing right now, because traditionally you couldn't do it in the way the old red teams worked. So we have red and blue now attacking, improving, attacking again, improving. And it goes back and forth for 3 weeks. So I don't necessarily care what the product necessarily does in the first week. It could be very bad. What I truly care about is the last week, on whether or not that ZT system is solidly defending. That's what we care about. From there, it gets installed. I'll just jump to the installation, and essentially the DoD is using it. Well, how do we know it's going to stay in configuration? We call it station keeping. We evaluated it or assessed it at a certain level, let's say target. How do we know it doesn't fall out of target? Well, what we now are thinking and are doing is developing a continuous assessment process using commercial tools that automate the testing so that a human red or blue teamer doesn't have to do it all the time. And this is how we're going to cover the entire landscape of millions and millions of endpoints from systems being tested. We're going to have leave-behinds of these devices that are going to do continuous assessment in an automated way that is specifically bespoke to the system of the ZT that was evaluated or assessed, because we're going to be using the information from the very beginning and feed it into the end. So these systems are going to be a little bit one-off, but they're going to test for these 10 criteria. And if there is a hole or if something's out of whack, it'll be immediately informed to the security operations center. So that's the sort of A to Z process we're thinking through, and we're practicing it now with our pilot activities. And so this is so very different than how we do red and blue teams currently.
Sure, and laser focused on a lot of energy to getting it there, and then a lot of energy to keep it there, which I think is fantastic. That's really a game changer and very important. I'm sure you're going to share that with the rest of the community.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
Once again, hats off to the DoD. Gary, how about at Illumio? Would you like to give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight in one of these agencies that are sort of taking it to the next level up the value chain here, so to speak?
Absolutely. I'm going to give a shout out to my former employer as a retired cyberspace operations officer from the Air Force. We've been working with the Air Force for the last couple of years, evaluating how they're doing business and how they can improve some of the things that they're doing. And they have gone really far down the path of embracing zero trust and getting to the point of looking at segmentation, having true visibility of how applications are interacting with each other across their entire enterprise, and then asking the hard questions of, are those applications behaving properly? Are they operating in safe manners? And how can they ensure that things that need to talk to each other are talking to each other, and they're only talking to each other using ports and protocols that are absolutely necessary for the functioning of that application, and then shutting off all the unnecessary connections. That's one of the things that we find oftentimes with our customers is when we walk in the door and we draw them a map, a visualization of all the interconnections that are going on their enterprise. They are completely surprised by the fact that they often say, I don't understand. I mean, my guys have shown me a PowerPoint slide that show a line going from point A to point B, and we go, yeah, but that's not showing you everything that's actually going on, right? It's not the reality of what's happening on your enterprise today. So the Air Force has taken great strides in understanding how their enterprise is really configured, what it really looks like, and really getting it locked down to a point where it's at the minimum amount of connections required, and then everything else is denied, right? And that's really the true underlying principle of zero trust, which is, not just that constant verification, but, you take things down to the smallest vector possible and deny everything else. So that you're only operating things that are absolutely necessary for the functioning of an application, for the function of your enterprise, and you've got it locked down as tight as possible. So yeah, so I give a huge shout out to the United States Air Force.
Fantastic. Down to the bare metal, everything else is a no-go.
Absolutely.
Amir, a program that you'd like to highlight over there at FERC.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things I want to highlight is we have a major program called the Application Layer Modernization Program. It's taking a lot of the mission applications that we have at FERC and modernizing them from legacy software and hardware into completely re-platformed, re-architected, many times pure SaaS services. So what we've done with this zero trust effort is we've tried to make it really simple for the application teams and when they deploy. So rather than having to guess what are the security requirements, what do I need to do, or what should I do in this case versus that case, we've built our enterprise services so the applications can just consume them. So in this case, the specific application that would be modernized, it's an application that's used by the commission for decision-making processes, electronically transfers these orders throughout different stages of decision-making, all the way to when the commissioners make an electronic vote, and then these orders become ready for the public within one of our commissions. So what we've done in that is, as they were developing that, if you look at each of the layers of the zero trust, our identity layer was built out, and the application was stood up, integrated straight with our identity provider, multi-factor authentication, didn't even have to think about it. They were most purely SaaS, but any server components they had on the device pillar automatically has our endpoint detection response, all the policies, all the hardening. Again, they don't have to worry about it. On the network side, I mentioned earlier in the previous question, spend a lot of time making sure everything internal is also encrypted. And on the application side, we actually embedded someone within their team that performed threat modeling. We did code analysis and basically manually expert sitting with them day to day throughout their entire project lifecycle. So we make sure the security is embedded, and some of the feedback that we got at the end of that, like it was just outstanding and simple because they didn't have to kind of keep going back and forth. It was there for them. It was embedded. They knew what to do. And then at the data layer, not only encrypting their data at rest, but also we had a whole easy to use, incorporate their logs, build up the alerts, make sure that we know what's going on. So they could focus their effort and energy on building the application. That in essence, that's what really matters, right? If that application doesn't work, FERC can't complete its mission. So then the security part is just built in there and ready to use rather than having to figure out what to do. So I think the Zero Trust program really helped us achieve that.
Fantastic, and a great use case example there. We really do appreciate it. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architectures, and we're getting down to the top priority for 2025. Number one priority for you, Randy, over at DoD 2025.
I would say understanding the solutions, plural, that the components are going to implement for zero trust to the target or advanced level down to the station level. So your question is timely. At the end of October, a month ago almost, Um, and as we're getting them, they're describing to us their entire enterprise, very large, let's say army, and they're breaking it down to individual enclaves and stations, as they call it. And they're telling us at the lowest level what course of action they're choosing, whether it's a cloud, whether it's on-prem, or whether it's an improvement of existing. Once we have a good picture of that across DoD, then we could start tracking solutions. And that's exactly where we want to be. That's our number one priority. And then we're going to hold them feet to the fire on actually procuring solutions and driving that all this spring and summer.
Love the laser focus. Really do appreciate it. Mark at NASA, top priority number one for 2025.
Well, for 2025, this is going to be a tougher question for me. We actually have like 12 improvements that we're looking to make across our enterprise to improve things such as data security, enterprise control, providing access to computers over unsecured networks, analyzing information flows, et cetera. But if I had to pick just one, we have had some significant challenges in dealing with OMB's memorandum M2131, which is all about cyber logging and the massive amount of information that's necessary to have available. And so from that perspective, we've had a study underway to develop an architecture that will help us move beyond where we are today, because what we're doing today, we won't be able to get there. There's just not enough money anywhere to be able to help us get there. So being able to act on the results of that particular study and that in laying in that particular architecture, that's our number one thing to be looking for in the upcoming year.
Fantastic, and we appreciate the crisp outline there. Gary, Illumio, number one priority for you all as you enter into 2025.
Just continuing to work with agencies to help them advance their zero trust architectures. And really helping them gain visibility inside their enterprises so they can have a true understanding of what's going on, so they can use that to formulate their future zero trust strategies.
Fantastic. Brandy, number one priority for CISA as you enter 2025.
Yeah, similar to what Randy mentioned, the top priority for my team right now is focused on reviewing the updated agency zero trust implementation plans that were required by M2414 alongside OMB and ONCD. We've made a lot of progress since 2022, and these updated implementation plans were a chance to kind of highlight those successes that we've made, the obstacles that we've overcome, and the work that's still planned to reach the next zero trust milestones, specific to those agencies. And then we're taking those plans and we're looking at the development of risk reflective assessments to gauge progress and measure zero trust control effectiveness. Very important, like Randy said, with the red teams and the blue teams, and moving forward, measuring our progress and the implementation of zero trust controls is going to be really important. And I think that we've all kind of realized the need for a scalable and consistent approach to assessing whether the controls that we've put into place are actually managing the risk across the environments and how those outcomes are tied to zero trust.
Right. I mean, measuring that effectiveness is super important. We really do appreciate it. Chris, Quest Software, number one priority for you all.
Sure. So we talk about zero trust. I think about the flip side of that coin, which is trust but verify. And that brought me back to, I think, the 80s when Reagan was negotiating with the then Soviet Union over the intermediate nuclear treaty on missiles. And he said trust but verify. Everyone thought it was his phrase. It was actually a Russian phrase. And he was using the language of the person he was trying to negotiate with. So as we try to do this zero trust thing, we have to understand the languages or the nomenclature of the people, platforms, and processes we're trying to provide security for. So that is, how do we treat the nodes, the endpoints? How do we treat the end users? How do we treat the data that they need to access and traverse? Is it encrypted at rest? As Amir was talking about the application modernization program at FERC. And lastly, how those APIs and how do we help developers create secure applications by default and by design? So our top priority is to give agencies the ability to govern and assess where they are in the compliance matrix for everything related to zero trust. So they can literally do the trust and the verification so everyone has the right access at the right time from the right device when they need it within the agencies.
Love the discussion on the measurement of this of these various activities. Amir, top priority for you at FERC in 2025.
So top priority for us is going to be just our data security policy and implementation. The CDO and CISO Council recently produced the Federal Zero Trust Data Security Guide, an outstanding document for us as well as for the rest of the government really to kind of follow. To me, it's all about identifying our data, the sensitivity of the data, access, encryption, privacy, because ultimately that's what we're trying to protect. And if we understand the sensitivity and the risk of the data, then we know where to invest, we know what to protect, and then we have actual facts that can drive our risk decisions as we implement the security program.
Really do appreciate that. We're going to wrap it up with this last question. We're going to fast forward into the future a couple of years. I'm going to start with you, Gary, at Illumio. What are we going to be talking about 2 to 3 years from now? Is East-West going to be well understood in table stakes, and we're sort of continuing to move our way up the value chain? Where do you expect us to be 2 years from now?
Yeah, at the rate that agencies are moving, which I compliment them given all the challenges that they have to face, I think what we're going to see is much more secure enterprises, both in DoD and across the federal government. Both from a identity perspective, all the way down to include segmentation and really having enterprises locked down really tight, so that they're much better able to defend against those threats out there. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the potential impact that AI is going to have in aiding defenders in defending their enterprises.
Really do appreciate that and look forward to it. Chris, how about at Quest Software? What's the focus going to be on 2 to 3 years from now?
I'm going to continue my 80s theme. So the Berlin Wall was erected because the East feared the West and the West feared the East.
You're going old school on us. I love it.
It's not really that old, Luke. Come on. But the Berlin Wall came about, and I think we have to think about IT in that same perspective, as we have a wall right now between what we have internally versus externally, on-prem versus cloud. And we think that right now there's this Berlin Wall, and there isn't. Our users have torn down that wall. And what I mean by that, they were using shadow IT in a way that we didn't anticipate. And that is, we have directives around artificial intelligence, but I think in the future, you're going to see a lot more shadow IT that's related to artificial intelligence. That is, they're going to find tools that you may not be aware of, and they're going to use agency data in those tools that you're not aware of. And that is the wall that we need to start thinking about. How do we construct and protect agency data assets from being pushed into public large language models? So I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more privatization. And what that I mean is that agencies are going to privatize their own large language models, their own AI infrastructure to ensure that agency data stays within that agency. So as we move forward, Zero Trust is going to take a much broader aspect of the end user's life, the administrator's lives. Governance is going to take on new meaning. I think Mark just talked about their ability and their need to collect and collate all those logs across the enterprise. Now think of that from an AI perspective. How do you not just correlate a systems log, but how do you now correlate all the data points within a database application, a SharePoint farm that's traversing your network, the cloud network, and it's being fed in and out of AI because somebody just needs an answer to a simple question. That's the challenge of the future, is how do we protect, how do we trust, how do we verify all those myriads of transactions across those data planes? And for us, it's a challenge. We don't have all those solutions. We have some solutions, but I think there's going to be a tremendous effort across both the industry and the government sector to figure out exactly how we protect assets that way.
Chris, you're raising some very good points there, and we look forward to seeing how those things evolve and get implemented. Amir, how about over at FERC? 2 years from now, you're going to be well on your way of implementing these capabilities. What's it going to look like at that point?
So, one of the things actually Chris just said I love, he said somebody needs an answer to a simple question. And that's actually a very, very good thing that we want as well. So being able to understand our data makes sense. There's just so much data between logs and vulnerabilities and authentication and everything. So the use of generative AI capability to really make the life of a SOC analyst easy. So instead of having to correlate or hunt for complex data and put them all together, be able to ask those simple questions of understanding the data, asking a question, getting a result back, and investigations kind of flying through rather than spending a lot of time on a single problem. So between that and just general automation, we took a look at the CISA maturity model to assess our own maturity for each of our high-valued assets. And kind of there's a common theme to get to optimal, and there's automation, automation, automation. So How do we automate control testing? How do we automate incident response? So just basically automation, generative AI is definitely places where we want to go.
Really do appreciate that and look forward to it. Mark, the acceleration of commercialization in space just seems to be getting faster and faster, if you will. I think about 2 to 3 years from now, we'll be well on our way to Mars in a big way. And I know you recognize that sort of delicate balance about making sure it's secure, but making sure the mission continues. What are you expecting 2 to 3 years from now? How do you see that environment maturing?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the biggest challenges that we have is collaborating with our partners. And whether that's,
Right.
internal partners, if it's
Mhm.
industry or academia, with foreign space agencies, foreign governments, just that ability to collaborate and to really work this upcoming space economy is a real challenge. And so for us, we're implementing what we call our enterprise access management capability to deal with that. And it's going to take advantage of all of the levers of zero trust to make sure that we're sharing what we can share, we're protecting what we have to protect, but it's going to reduce that friction that's involved with collaboration. Now, Chris touched on something really near and dear to our hearts because, being that we're into exploration and discovery, artificial intelligence is a big deal here. And so, from a point of innovation, we're closely watching and we're experimenting with generative AI. We're looking for it to be able to not only support the business of NASA, but also for support of those very things you talked about, space exploration, our move from here to the moon to Mars, and beyond. And so AI is a big deal. We're also looking at machine learning, especially in the cybersecurity technologies arena, because we want to make sure that we can take advantage of those capabilities when they become available in the market.
Yeah, I would imagine with this space economy and all these vast partners that you described, the zero trust architecture came just in time. It would be impossible to think guards, gates, and locks is going to be able to solve those issues. Randy, how about at DoD? I would imagine 2 to 3 years from now, you'll have the continuous monitoring well embedded in place. Perhaps it's propagated across the rest of the federal service. What can we expect 2 to 3 years from now in regards to the journey that you're on and the thought leadership on the architecture?
So, we think and dream in the future a lot in the portfolio office because we have to, fortunately
Got to
and
stay ahead of it. Yeah.
unfortunately, we work in 2-year cycles. And if we want to do something like now, we got to plan for it now and then hope we could do it, 1 or 2 years from now. So that's the reality. So I would say this, it's like a multidimensional problem. You said it first. A couple years from now, I'm convinced that all of the components will be well on their way, if not have installed and are in the middle of moving apps, users, and data into environments that we would call target level zero trust. Other elements of the federal government, including DoD, will be helping us determine whether or not this first generation ZT solutions actually work. We know they work based on the purple teams, but putting it in the ground and actually seeing the reality and what the security operations centers are seeing is different. And based on what we see for real, we will then feed that back into industry demand. So that'll become what, arguably I'll say second generation zero trust needs, requirements, demand signal. I also see it, and I see it now, that we're going to have to think of the Security Operations Center in a completely different way. So let's call it modernization of the Security Operations Center. We need a next generation thinking process on how to do cyber defense and what a Security Operations Center needs to do. Somebody mentioned AI. AI is a gigantic part of it. It goes without saying. So we're going to need AI as a lever, a tool to get us that analytics and visibility light years ahead of what we have today. And lastly, I would say that there's some phenomenon going on that not many, if nobody, really has spoken about this. And that is that you almost have a pre-ZT and a post-ZT world. And so pre-ZT, it was the cybersecurity vendors that were driving innovation. And the government was just a marketplace. What I am seeing in my chair is that now the DoD and the U.S. federal government is driving the innovation of need. We're the first ones that are installing this, and so the vendors and the market is fulfilling that demand. And everybody is finally recognizing that if the DoD is facing these problems and issues, so is industry and the DIB and the banks and all other marketplaces other than DoD are facing the same cybersecurity problems. So whatever solutions the vendors come up to satisfy the DoD demand are the same solutions that they could resell to the marketplace. And so post ZT or in a ZT cybersecurity world, it's the DoD federal government that's driving the innovation, the requirements of the innovation, and then leaning on industry to fulfill them. So even though we might be numerically, financially a smaller market overall, industry can't not address the DoD requirements, or else they're going to fall behind their peers in product development, if you understand what I'm saying, because that's where DoD and the federal government is going. This is where the threats are. This is where the threats need to be mitigated. And so being early and working with us, large, plural us, benefits the rest of almost the overall majority of the rest of the marketplace of these vendors. And so I see a win-win situation.
Sure, that turning of the tables from the vendor saying, here's what you need to DoD and the rest of the federal service saying, here's what we require, type of thing, which I think is quite frankly healthy. Brandy, you're going to take us home. 2 to 3 years from now, the thought leadership that's coming out of CISA is absolutely amazing. 2 to 3 years from now, where do you expect your organization to be spending its time and focus?
Yeah, so as we enter a year of transition, it's even more important now that our Zero Trust plans serve as a roadmap, both short and long term, right? Helping us make threat-informed decisions with the limited resources that we have. We can't achieve Zero Trust goals without promoting governance as a key enabler for that, right? Our cross-cutting capabilities need a lot more attention, the orchestration and application of those across the board. For Zero Trust implementation and pushing for the integration of different tools that are secure by design to make security orchestration a reality. As for CISA, we're going to continue to focus on providing effective implementation solutions, education and training for our Zero Trust community, playbooks and guidance, and moving towards a model that allows us to bolster our national security. And that requires, layered defenses, security controls, and Zero Trust architecture are how we get there.
Really do appreciate it and appreciate everybody's time here for taking a few moments out of your busy day to join us on this program. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.